Questions? Questions orales?
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, Canada made a promise to everyone. It's very simple. Work hard, get a big paycheck, and buy food and affordable housing in safe communities, no matter where you're from. But this Canadian promise, like everything else, is broken after 9 years of this Prime Minister who's doubled the cost of housing. This week, I proposed eliminating the GST on the purchase of a new home. Everyone is in agreement it's going to reduce the cost of a new home. Will the Prime Minister accept my common sense idea? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The problem, Mr. Speaker, the fundamental problem for the opposition leader is that all the challenges he sees, he's got one solution for them: cutting services, programs and investments for Canadians. Even when he tries to put forward solutions for housing, he wants to cut. He cuts thousands, millions, billions of dollars in building more housing. He's calling for a cut of $9 billion that we're sending to the government of Quebec to accelerate housing starts across Quebec. We need investments to build new homes, not cuts and austerity. That's all that the Conservative Party is offering us. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. It's not surprising that the Prime Minister is against cutting GST on housing because he doubled the cost. He did it by breaking the immigration system, by printing $750 billion in inflationary funding, by funding bureaucracies that prevent construction, and by putting new taxes on housing. He's trying to build more bureaucracy in Ottawa, bureaucracy that doesn't lead to any new housing. So, once again, will he go back on 9 years of failure, accept our common sense idea, cut GST on new homes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party's plan is to cut hundreds of millions of dollars for Quebec, to cut investments in housing across the country. That's not what Canadians need. We are investing in housing. We are investing to build more opportunities across the country for people, and all he's offering is billions of dollars in cuts in services and programs and services that Canadians need. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canada makes everyone a promise. It's a very simple deal. You work hard, you get decent food, and a good home in a safe neighbourhood. Doesn't matter where you come from, you work hard, that's what you get. But that promise, like everything else, is broken after 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister. He's doubled housing costs. That's why I came forward with a now widely celebrated idea to axe the GST sales tax on new homes, saving up to $50,000 on the cost of a new home. Will he accept my common sense plan to axe the tax and build the homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing that the Conservative leader is offering at a time where Canadians need support is cuts. He's proposing to cut billions of dollars of investments in housing across the country to increase densification, to cut red tape, to accelerate the construction of homes and apartments that Canadians need. He's offering cuts. He's offering austerity. He's saying everything is broken, and then he's thinking that cuts to services and programs and investments is what's going to help Canadians. That's not responsible leadership, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He proposes to cut bureaucracy and taxes, Mr. Speaker. Let's axe the sales tax on new homes, saving up to $50,000 on a new home. That's a savings of almost $2,700 per year in lower mortgage payments. By contrast, the Prime Minister offers a multi-billion-dollar housing bureaucracy in Ottawa that his own housing minister admits doesn't build homes. So why won't he listen to his own housing minister and accept my common sense plan to axe the tax and build the homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most fundamental responsibilities of any Canadian Prime Minister is the safety of Canadians. Unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition has failed at his responsibility to keep his own MPs safe from foreign interference. So I have asked the security services to figure out a way to give some information to the Leader of the Opposition so that he can actually fulfill his responsibility of protecting Canadians, including those within his own caucus. It would be easier if he got a security clearance, but I've asked them to give him some information nonetheless.
Can I ask the honourable member from Selkirk into Eastmain, please, not to take the microphone. The honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the Prime Minister has told his caucus he's not sleeping. He's pulling his hair out with stress because of his caucus revolting against him. Now he's spreading tin pot conspiracy theories rather than answering the question. 80% of Canadians now believe that home ownership is only for the very rich after he doubled the cost of housing in 9 years. I came forward with a common sense plan to axe the GST on new homes, saving up to 50 grand on a new home. Why won't he accept my plan to axe the tax and build the home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
He just put forward a plan to cut billions of dollars of investment in housing across the country. But, Mr. Speaker, in regards to issues of national security, it is extraordinarily difficult to see a leader of the Conservative Party refuse to get the necessary security briefings that would allow him to protect his own MPs and indeed protect our Canadian democracy. So I have asked the security services to figure out a way to share some information, perhaps even some names, with the leader of the Conservative Party so that he can take action and protect his members.
The honourable member for La Prairie. How to lose at Politics 101. 80% of voters are asking the Prime Minister to increase old age security for seniors aged 65 to 74. Every party here voted in favour of it, even his. Thanks to the Bloc Québécois, the Prime Minister had a unique opportunity to be fair to seniors, please 80% of people, and stay in power. He could have scored a triple, Mr. Speaker. Instead, he chose to abandon seniors, to say no to 80% of voters, and to buy himself an election. 0 for 3, Mr. Speaker. Does he understand now why nobody wants him around anymore? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Our government is investing in seniors. We increased the guaranteed income supplement by 10%. We are helping older seniors, those aged 75 and up, with an increase in old age security. And we delivered dental care. Over 1 million seniors across the country have seen a major difference thanks to that program. Dental care, by the way, that the Bloc decided to vote against. I would suggest that if they're taking suggestions on how to be popular in politics, that they deliver dental care services to seniors who need it. Maybe that would be a good thing that they could do instead of being like the Conservatives and voting against it. The honourable member for La Prairie. The Prime Minister could have helped 1 million Quebec seniors with the help of the Bloc. Instead, he abandoned them to go back to his ex who kicked him out, the NDP. You know, he went back, his tail between his legs, to a party that's so disconnected from Quebec that its only Quebec MP is desperately looking for a way out and into the administration of the city of Montreal. I feel sorry for Montreal. The Prime Minister could have chosen 1 million Quebecers. Instead, he chose 25 MPs, 96% of whom are from outside of Quebec. Does he understand that we don't need a secret ballot to know that nobody in Quebec trusts him anymore? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we can understand that when the Bloc has the support of the Conservative Party, Quebecers are going to be very concerned. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that we are here to invest in seniors. We were there with dental care where the Bloc and the Conservative Party voted against it. We were there to increase the guaranteed income supplement by 10% for the most vulnerable seniors. That's one of the very first things that we did as a government, and the Bloc and the Conservatives voted against it. We were there to increase old age security for seniors 75 and up because they have more costs, and the Bloc voted against that as well.
The honourable member from Burnaby South.
Let's talk about women. In Alberta, Daniel Smith, the Premier, is privatizing healthcare and giving it to Covenant. Covenant refuses to give abortions. That is clearly a violation of the Canada Health Act. Does the Prime Minister agree? Yes or no?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are the government that has stood up for women's rights unequivocally across this country, including pulling back transfers to provinces where abortion services and reproductive health wasn't being delivered. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we're moving forward with more ways to protect women's rights. Just yesterday, we presented a Ways and Means motion that's going to mean that pregnancy crisis centres will have to disclose whether or not they're actually offering the full suite of reproductive services and rights to women, or whether they are going to leave women without support and without choices at an extremely delicate time.
That's right.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
It's her body, her choice, not her body, Conservative Party's choice.
The Conservatives have revealed a new plan for a cut. This time they want to cut in the Affordable Housing Accelerator Fund. And now the Bloc wants to support them. The Bloc had some power, but they weren't able to do anything to resolve the housing crisis in Quebec. People need affordable housing, not infighting. Will the Liberals finally wake up? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to follow up on the first part of the question from my honourable colleague on the fact that the Conservative Party continues to attack women's rights. Now, I certainly have questions about the Conservative MPs from Quebec within the Conservative Party of Canada who have sat on their hands while their colleagues attack women as rights, the anti-choice members of the Conservative Party. We are seeing women's rights under attack everywhere, and the Conservative Party is encouraging them with the MPs they've elected. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois and the leader of the Bloc Québécois has literally nothing, delivered nothing for Quebecers, nothing for seniors, nothing for farmers. But despite that, he voted almost 200 times to keep this Prime Minister in power. He voted for $500 million in inflationary bureaucratic spending, $500 million in deficit spending. At the same time, Quebecers are suffering from the cost of housing, which has doubled. Will the Prime Minister accept to call an election so that Quebecers can support my plan to get rid of GST on new homes? Just before I recognize the Prime Minister, I would just like to ask all members, please, to put your phones on silence. It's good for the interpreters. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I said it in English, I'll repeat it in French. We know that one of the fundamental responsibilities of everyone in this House is to protect the safety, security, and well-being of Canadians. However, with his completely unexplainable decision to not get his security clearance, the Conservative leader is putting Canadians at risk, including members of his own party. That's why I have asked our security services to share as much information as possible with the Conservative leader so that he can better protect his MPs, despite the fact that he's still refusing, for reasons that we don't know, to get his security clearance to know everything about this issue. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
This Prime Minister doubled housing costs, doubled the debt, doubled gun crime, and now doubled food bank use, that the NDP would be pulling its support. After all, the leader said the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people, and yet there he is, still in power. He doesn't even have the confidence of his own Liberal MPs, but he seems to still have the confidence of the sellout NDP leader. So, will the costly carbon tax coalition stand up in front of Canadians and let people vote in a carbon tax election for change in the future?
I ask members to be very judicious in their choice of words regarding specific members. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, watchers of Canadian politics will remember that last year, the Conservative Party got up pretty much every time they could to talk about national security, to talk about it in a partisan way, but to talk about it every chance they could get. And now that we have offered the Leader of the Opposition a security clearance so that he can be fully informed on national security, all that they've been able to say is political attacks and asking questions of other parties. Why has the Leader of the Opposition chosen to not get a security clearance when the safety of his own MPs is in the balance?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it looks like the Prime Minister is worried about his personal political security as his MPs are revolting and trying to push him out of the job. And so he's desperately trying to change the channel on the questions that I've asked. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think that's unfair, though. Those MPs helped this Prime Minister double housing costs, double the debt, double gun crime, double food bank use. Why won't he turn around and look them in the eye and say they should stand up for their own record and his, face the music in a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no responsibility by the government is more important than keeping Canadians safe. That's why our security services every single day take actions and work hard to keep Canadians safe. So it is inexplicable to our security services that they cannot let the leader of the Conservative Party know about the threats facing him, his party, and our democracy because he refuses to get a security clearance. So I have asked those security agencies to look at ways to share at least some information with him and perhaps some names so that he can protect his
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if he wants to release the names, he legally can do it now on the floor of the House of Commons. He can do it.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, now we're getting something. He's actually engaging on the issue of national security. Unfortunately, he is willing to put at risk the agents, the officers, the sources that are putting their lives at risk to keep Canadians safe. There is a reason we do not disclose classified information in places where our adversaries are watching and paying attention. But we can release many names to him and much information to him if he only gets his security clearance. So he will be able to keep his own team members safe from foreign interference, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He won't release the names because he knows that he and his party are compromised. And he won't answer my question because right now, 24 of his MPs are rebelling against him. They're asking for a secret ballot to fire him, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, as I say, that is not fair. Every one of those MPs helped this Prime Minister create 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario. Every one of them voted to quadruple the carbon tax. They can't just throw him out. He can't just run away. They need to face the music. Why won't we have a carbon tax election now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
For well over a year in this House, just about every question from the Leader of the Opposition was about national security, was about foreign interference. And we called a commission of inquiry. We've offered security clearances to all leaders. And indeed, the leader of the Green Party, the NDP, and the Bloc have all done the responsible thing and gotten their security clearances and gotten top-secret briefings from our security services. The leader of the Conservative Party chooses to play the pettiest form of politics instead of stepping up on his responsibilities as leader, protecting Canadians, protecting his MPs, protecting our institutions.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, security and safety depends on housing. In Quebec, the cost of housing has doubled. In Montreal, the cost of rent has tripled after 9 years of this Prime Minister who's building bureaucracy, who's printing money, who's broken the immigration system, and who has applied taxes on corrupt businesses. And that's why I've proposed a common sense idea to cut the GST on housing. The Prime Minister says that he'd rather put money into bureaucracy. I want to cut taxes for those who are buying a home. Can we have an election on the question of eliminating the GST on housing? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are extremely perplexed right now because we know very well that the Conservatives, apparently, according to themselves, are interested in law and order and crime and national security and defense. It's in everything that they put out in the elections. But when it comes time where there's a real threat to Canadians' safety and even to the safety of his own MPs, the Conservative leader refuses to get his security clearance. He refuses to take his responsibilities seriously. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Every party here voted to protect supply management with C-282. Every party stood with farmers to call on the Senate to stop blocking this bill. Everyone is telling Senators Beam and Harder to get to work. It's time today for the Prime Minister to take his responsibilities seriously, to be responsible for our farmers. He appointed the senators who are blocking this bill, and it's his fault that we're stuck with them. Will he finally ask these two Royal Highnesses to pass Bill C-282 immediately? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have always been very clear that we will protect supply management. That's what we did against the Trump administration. That's what we will continue to do by making sure that we keep our promises to always protect supply management in any free trade negotiations that we undertake in the coming years. We are defending that right now, and we expect the Senate to pass this bill so that we can make sure that the future of supply management will always be protected for Canadians. We completely agree with the Bloc Québécois on this. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Well, nice words, Mr. Speaker, but not only did he appoint these senators, the senators that are blocking C-282, but one of the two of them is even a good buddy of his. Peter Harder brags about it on his Senate webpage. He says that the Prime Minister, when he was in the opposition, called him several times for advice and help. And then 6 months later, he got a Senate seat. The Prime Minister in person picked up the phone and called him. If the Prime Minister can call him for advice, can he not ring him up to tell him to do his job? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the independence and the important work that the Senate does. The Senate studies bills, makes recommendations, and over the years, we've appointed exceptional senators who are doing responsible and diligent work in that place. At the same time, we always expect the senators to take into account the will and the decisions of this House. And the House voted unanimously to protect supply management, as we've always committed to do, protecting supply management in any trade agreement and free trade negotiations. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. 9 years after this Prime Minister promised to end chronic homelessness, it's gone up by 38%. But happily, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness says that my Conservative plan to eliminate the GST on the purchase of a new home is, quote, intelligent. So if the Prime Minister is really interested in ending the housing crisis that he created, will he listen to the people who are trying to end homelessness and accept my common sense plan and eliminate the GST on new homes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. To fight homelessness, I would recommend that the Conservative leader call his friends, the Conservative premiers of Saskatchewan and Ontario, to accept and tell them to accept the money that we're putting on the table to fight homelessness and end the encampments that are making people so vulnerable. But it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, to see to what extent the Conservative leader refuses to answer a very simple question. Why is he refusing to get his security clearance to protect our institutions, our democracy, and his own colleagues in the Conservative Party? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And Builders Association stated that my common sense Conservative plan to axe the sales tax on new homes under $1 million is, and I quote, the most significant housing announcement made in the past 2 decades. Removing the GST shows leadership to cut crippling levels of taxation on new housing, puts money directly back in the pockets of Canadians while combating the housing crisis. Why won't the Prime Minister listen to the people who build homes so that we can reverse the crisis he caused? Why don't we axe the sales tax on new homes today?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
You know what shows leadership, Mr. Speaker? Taking seriously the safety of Canadians. Exactly. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP has concluded that the government of India was involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil, in extortion, in violence, in drive-by shootings, in home invasions, and the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada refuses to get his security clearance so that he can keep Canadians safe, can even keep his fellow MPs safe. That's why I've asked our security services to find a way to share some information with him so maybe he can do at least a part of his job.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We'd like to see him do any of his job after 9 years, Mr. Speaker, like reversing the housing price increase he caused. Let me quote British Columbia's Victoria Residential Builders Association said, quote, reducing government costs, including GST, would have a significant impact on housing affordability. The Conservative leader's suggestion is welcome news and long overdue if the federal government wants to get serious about housing affordability for Canadians. This common sense plan will stimulate 30,000 new extra homes built every year. So will he accept my common sense plan to axe the tax and build the homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Conservatives, you always need to look at the fine print underneath the easy slogans. And the fine print on this one is cutting billions of dollars of investments in housing right across the country at a time where we need to be building more housing more quickly. Cuts are not the solution. But if he wants to take something seriously, perhaps he should take seriously the issue of national security, because he refuses, for inexplicable, political, childish, who knows what reasons, refuses to get his security clearance that will allow him to keep his own MPs safe, to keep Canadians safe, to keep our democracy and its institutions safe.
The The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years after promising he'd get rid of chronic homelessness, it's actually risen by 38%. Now there are 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario. It's almost as bad as it is in NDP-governed British Columbia. But there is good news. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness heard about my common sense plan to axe the GST on housing, and their founder said, "This is smart." Mr. Speaker, those who are fighting to end homelessness, like my solution of axing the sales tax on new homes, will he accept my plan to axe the tax and build the homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, like I said, if he wants to be helpful on the issue against homeless, maybe he could give a call to his fellow Conservatives, the premiers of Saskatchewan and Ontario, to agree to accept the money we're putting on the table that they could match to support people living in encampments and fight homelessness effectively on the ground. But he won't do that. And what else he won't do is get his security clearance so that he can actually protect his fellow MPs, protect Canadians in this democracy. He refuses to get the security clearance necessary to keep Canadians safe. That's not the kind of leadership Canadians have.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Systemic anti-black discrimination is widespread in the public service. In fact, the Treasury Board Secretariat found that the Canadian Human Rights Commission discriminated against black employees. Now, instead of supporting these workers, right now the Liberal government is fighting these workers in court. So will the Prime Minister stop fighting black employees in court and settle the Thompson class action lawsuit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in extending the UN decade of support for people of African descent, this government has done more to recognize systemic bias, systemic discrimination, unconscious bias, and anti-black racism than any other. But there is always more to do, Mr. Speaker, which is why we have stepped up with the Black Entrepreneurship Strategy that is responding to the needs by black communities to access more capital to create the prosperity that they so need to be able to create for their communities, why we're continuing to invest in anti-black racism initiatives, continuing to stand with the black community. There's always more to do, and we will do it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Abortion is health care. 1 in 3 people who can get pregnant will need abortion care in their lifetime. But for close to a decade, this Liberal government failed to remove barriers, letting Conservative premiers cut access to abortion. And this Conservative leader secretly voted 5 times to take away the right to choose. Canadians want to see access to reproductive health care protected. Why have the Liberals not enforced the Canada Health Act to protect equal access to health care, including abortion?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my daughter is in the gallery today, so I want her to hear me as long as everyone else does. This government is unequivocally pro-choice. We will always defend a woman's right to choose, full stop. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we've actually pulled back funding from provinces that haven't been delivering access to abortion in their jurisdictions, why we will continue to enforce the Canada Health Act. But, Mr. Speaker, it is the Conservative Party, with its dangerous attack on women's rights, that should have people worried right across the country. At a time where we've seen Roe versus Wade overturned, attacks on women's rights, the Conservative leader can't stand up and defend women's rights.
I'd like to remind the Right Honourable Prime Minister and all members, please, to not make mention to people in the galleries. It is against the rules of this place. Alors, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for St. Laurent. Mr. Speaker, our government has always protected women's right to choose, but the anti-choice lobby of the caucus and the Conservative caucus and the leader are controlling it. And some of these anti-choice organizations that support the Conservatives use deceptive tactics to deter women from accessing a complete array of reproductive care. Can the Prime Minister tell Canadians about the measures taken by our government to protect women from these centres? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'd like to thank the member for Saint Laurent for her diligent work on defending women's rights. We have heard too many women tell us about how they experienced shame, and that's unacceptable. That's why yesterday we presented a bill to force these centres to be more transparent. Otherwise, they risk losing their status as a charitable organization. Unlike the Conservative leader, the Liberals will always defend women's right to choose and their right to access the health care they need, including the entire array of reproductive care services. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that he opposes taking the GST off of new homes. He wants to keep the taxes high and keep housing prices rising. His solution is to fund more bureaucracy. And what has that done? Well, that's doubled housing costs. It's caused a 39% increase in homelessness rates. So I've got an idea. Why don't we let Canadians decide? If he won't have a carbon tax election, why don't we have a housing tax election and allow Canadians to decide on more bureaucracy through him or axing the sales tax through me?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians watching today will see that the Leader of the Opposition is refusing to stand up and take a strong position in protecting women's rights unequivocally in this House. He can't because his MPs won't let him. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, he's refusing to protect his MPs by not getting the security clearance necessary to get fully informed on threats to our democracy from foreign powers. Why won't he get the security clearance necessary to take international interference seriously?
That's right. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, his tinfoil hat conspiracy theories and misinformation will not distract. We stand up for women's rights every day on this side. It has been our 20-year-long policy in the Conservative Party that there will be no restrictions on women's reproductive choices or on abortion. He knows that, but he doesn't want to discuss the issues that we do disagree on, which are this. Housing costs have doubled under him. His solution is to spend billions more on bureaucracy that drives them up further. We want to help women and men own a home, so will he vote for a housing tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be interested to see him do a very simple thing in his next answer. Switch the order of the statements he just made. Anytime he talks about unequivocally standing up for women's rights in this House, crickets from the Conservative backbench. That is because consistently members of the Conservative Party of Canada move forward measures that restrict and restrain women's rights, that limit women's rights to a full suite of reproductive services. The Conservative Party members do not stand up for women's rights, so nor does the...
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of women's rights, just yesterday, his former parliamentary secretary came out publicly, Selina Cesar-Chavan, and said that she was abused, intimidated, and mistreated by this Prime Minister, that he used her for his fake feminist agenda, and that he treated her like garbage, Mr. Speaker. It is terrible the way he exercises hypocrisy. Housing hypocrisy by doubling costs, tax hypocrisy by raising people's prices while flying around the world. How about putting an end to the hypocrisy and calling a carbon tax elected?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What is fascinating, Mr. Speaker, is the spectacle of watching.
I would ask the honourable members to not speak when they are not recognized by the chair. I insist. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is fascinating to see the lengths to which the Conservative leader will go to avoid the issue of national security, to avoid the issue of safety of Canadians, to avoid talking about issues of foreign interference, because he cannot answer why he refuses to take the security clearance that would allow him to access top secret information focused on keeping his members safe, keeping our democracy safe. We know that foreign governments interfered in the last leadership campaigns in the Conservative Party. He wants nothing to do.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, Prime Minister is coming unglued. He's flailing around, spreading conspiracy theories and demonstrable disinformation in order to distract from the fact that not only did he double housing costs, double gun crime, and double food bank use, but now 24 of his own MPs want to fire him. We can't go on like this with a Prime Minister who admits he can't even sleep at night because he is so in knots. Will he let his 24 dissident MPs vote freely on a non-confidence motion so we can have a carbon tax elected?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm confused about what happened. The Conservative Party used to be about defence of Canada, but they dropped the defence spending to below 1% last time they were in office. They're supposed to be about law and order, but they stand against stronger measures on gun control. And they're supposed to be about national security, and the leader of the Conservative Party refuses to get the necessary security briefings to keep our democracy safe and to distinguish from the conspiracy theories that float around what is fact and what is fiction. Why won't he trust our national security agencies?
The Honourable Member from Montcalm. As of today, advance requests for aid will be allowed in Quebec. Finally, Quebecers diagnosed with a serious and incurable disease leading to incapacity will be able to submit a request to their doctors. But these doctors are still worried about the lack of legal protection because of this government's continued refusal to amend the criminal code. It's a lack of courage and a dangerous game the Liberals are playing. It harms patients and doctors who are worried about being sued. Will the Prime Minister show some compassion and amend the criminal code without delay as proposed by C390? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, medical assistance in dying is a deeply personal and sensitive choice that involves individuals and their families in a difficult decision. The potential expansion of eligibility in terms of these advance requests is a major decision. Therefore, we are launching a national conversation, and we will not take any legal steps in this bill yet because we want to cooperate with Quebec and with all provinces and territories in order to attentively assess the next steps. Thank you. The Honourable Member from Montcalm. It's not time to talk, it's time to act, because I might remind the Prime Minister that his government is a minority and could fall at any moment. Now, some of these consultations have already been done, And the fact that they're not going to pursue the government of Quebec doesn't change anything. We know that the next government will be conservative, and it's useless to claim the contrary. The far-right conservative wing is opposed to MAID, so why is the Prime Minister putting the fate of these patients in the hands of the Conservatives? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I fully agree with my colleague from the Bloc that the Conservatives represent a major risk for the freedoms of Canadians across the country. But we must not make any decisions that are too hasty on such an issue. We must ensure the protection of the most vulnerable Canadians and Quebecers, and we must ensure that people can make a free and informed decision. That is why we need to take the time necessary to work with the provinces and territories to evaluate the different issues and ensure that Canadians make the right choice. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Years of releasing violent gun criminals and leaving our borders open to smugglers. This Prime Minister has presided over a 116% increase in gun violence. And yet he was out boasting about it on Twitter. The Toronto Police Union, the largest police union in Canada, said his words were out of touch. They were offensive to victims and brave officers. So, given that his approach has doubled gun crime, why won't he accept our common sense plan? To lock up the gun criminals, scan the cans, and stop the crime.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when the Conservative Party's plan on guns is to unfreeze the market on handguns and legalize assault-style weapons across this country, nobody can take them seriously on the issue of guns. But they are talking about national security now and safety, which begs the question, why will the leader of the Conservative Party not get the necessary security briefings, clearance to get the necessary security briefings to show Canadians that he's capable of taking national security seriously?
I ask the members to not carry on loud conversations, and particularly the honourable member from Waterloo across the highway, while she is not being recognized. The honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Unfreeze. Mr. Speaker, it has never been easier for a criminal to get a handgun. In addition to which, that he's allowed it to be legal today to own a handgun. He has brought in an amnesty on his own gun ban, re-legalizing all the guns that he said he was going to ban. And 4 years after he held that big press conference with a scary-looking black gun on the front of his podium, a made-in-Hollywood-style cartoon, gun crime is actually up dramatically. So why doesn't he actually ban the criminals, secure the borders, and stop the crime?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, slogans furnished to him by the gun lobby don't keep Canadians safe. Canadians know that significant common sense gun control measures, which we have put forward, are what is making a difference in keeping Canadians safe, and we will continue to do that. But we are now at least talking about security issues, so Canadians may be wondering, why is it that the leader of the Conservative Party continues to refuse to get the appropriate clearances from our national security agencies so he can take the issue of foreign interference, including against his own party, seriously?
Once again, as I just mentioned before, I'm going to ask all members, please, not to have conversations across the way, including the member from Dufferin-Caledon. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, there's been an increase in of 800% with regard to since the Prime Minister has allowed these hard drug consumption sites. People who live in that community are terrified because of the chaos that this Prime Minister has sown. Under Section 56(1) of CDSA to close these drug consumption sites. Will he do so? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the opioid crisis and drug addiction is a scourge that profoundly impacts Canadians across this country. Our approach is science-based, it's fact-based, and also we use compassion, and we try to work with the organizations on the ground, with the provinces and the municipalities and experts. We will continue to take this approach. We will not criminalize people who have mental health problems, and that is going to save lives, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Humber River, Black Creek.
Mr. Speaker, our government has always been clear that ensuring a woman's freedom of choice should be protected. But many Canadians are rightfully worried that a Conservative government would not protect this fundamental right. It is alarming that women's rights and freedoms are under attack in the Conservative Party. Can the Prime Minister tell us how our Liberal government will continue to protect a woman's right to make decisions about her own body?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Humber River Black Creek is right. Yesterday, we announced that we're holding pregnancy crisis centres accountable for preventing women from making informed choices. While we're protecting women's freedom of choice, the Conservative Party is trying to roll it back. Any party leader that allows their MPs to introduce anti-choice legislation, actively recruits anti-choice candidates, and takes their money cannot say that they are pro-choice. Right. It's time the Conservative Party ends their filibuster and allows this House to vote on reproductive rights. Right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years, 9 million Canadians live in food insecurity, according to Food Banks Canada. 9 million, that's 23% of our population. 23%, twice as high as the rate in the United States. Food prices have risen 36% faster in Canada than in the States, and that gap has happened at the same time as the implementation of the carbon tax and all the government greed. Now he wants to quadruple the carbon tax and starve even more people. Why not have a carbon tax election so Canadians can vote to axe the tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Canada Carbon Rebate puts more money back in the pockets of the middle class and people working hard to join it. The Parliamentary Budget Officer recognized that 8 out of 10 Canadians are better off with the Canada Carbon Rebate than the price on pollution costs them in their jurisdictions. So the Leader of the Opposition is proposing to take away money from vulnerable families across this country at a time they need it. Terrible. What the Leader of the Opposition is also doing is refusing to get the security clearance necessary to keep Canadians safe by getting the briefings from our security agencies that talk about foreign interference.
Right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if the carbon tax made people better off, we wouldn't see a doubling of food bank use under this Prime Minister. You can't blame the rest of the world. Food prices have risen 36% faster in Canada than in the United States of America in the same time period. And that gap grew as the carbon tax came in year after year over the last half decade. It turns out if you tax the farmers who make the food, the truckers who ship the food, the grocers who sell the food, you tax all who buy the food. So if he really wants to quadruple that tax, why not have a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Canada Carbon Rebate puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians right across the country, and it's top economists, scientists, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer who've declared that. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we know the Leader of the Opposition won't listen to experts. He won't even listen to our national security experts who are trying to let him know about threats to his own MPs. I have asked them to figure out a way to share at least some information with him, despite the fact that he has refused to get a security clearance, because the responsibility of Prime Minister is to protect all Canadians, including, apparently, Conservative MPs.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, more division to distract. You know, here we have 2 million people lining up at food banks. 1/4 of Canadians live in food insecurity, a level twice as high as in the United States. Food prices rising 36% faster in Canada than in the U.S., coinciding with the carbon tax coming into force. Now he wants to quadruple it. 56% of food banks say they're literally rationing food rationing in a first world country, Mr. Speaker. Before he starves more people, why can't we have a carbon tax election and axe the tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if he actually cared about food insecurity, instead of just wanting to politicize and instrumentalize it, he would have supported our national school food program. Right. But he does not. What he also will not do is take seriously his responsibility as a party leader in this House, as someone who desperately wants to become Prime Minister, to actually get the security clearance and therefore the briefings necessary to protect our democracy, our institutions, and his team members from the threats of foreign interference. That, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely irresponsible.
That's right.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Public Safety Committee heard from top national security and law enforcement officials on Indian interference in Canada. Despite the concerning evidence, the Conservative leader refuses to speak directly on this issue, choosing instead to hide behind his MPs. The government has been clear that all responsible leaders need security clearances so they can make responsible decisions to protect Canadians. Can the Prime Minister explain why the Conservative leader should get his security clearance, get briefed, and protect our democracy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Kitchener-Conestoga for his hard work. Canadians shouldn't be surprised that the Conservative leader refuses to call out Indian foreign interference. He's refused to get briefed up, to get the security clearance necessary, to get the understanding that our national security agencies want him to have to better be able to both protect his own MPs, to protect our institutions, and to protect Canadians. Let me put it in phrases that perhaps the Leader of the Opposition will eventually understand. Get the clearance, get the briefings, protect Canadians.
The Honourable Member from North Island, Powell River.
Canadians who serve in the military deserve our gratitude and support. But we've learned that for at least 19 years, this Liberal government and the former Conservative government overcharged veterans and their families for long-term care beds. Again, veterans and their families have to fight this government tooth and nail to get what they are due. Canadians need to know who did what and when. Will the Prime Minister immediately end this long-term care gouging?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Veterans Affairs has asked her officials to investigate this matter further. We are committed to supporting our veterans, have been since day one. That's why we invested over $11 billion in new services and supports for veterans since 2016, including reopening the 9 veteran service centres that the Harper government shuttered, rehiring 1,000 staff that the Harper government had fired, and we're continuing to work to improve the services and benefits and supports for veterans and for their families.
Right. The Honourable Member from Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister wants to talk about national security. Let's do it. On New Year's Eve, Canadians will be ushering in the Hogue Commission's final report on foreign interference. But meanwhile, media continue to provide insight as to who are the infamous 11 parliamentarians in the pocket of China. Mr. Speaker, does a Prime Minister have trouble sitting at the cabinet table when he must wittingly know that at least one of his ministers is not working in the service of Canada, or is he entirely witless?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that was an absolutely disgraceful display of irreverence and unseriousness in a place that deserves a serious contemplation of issues of national security. But it doesn't surprise me he's choosing to sit with the Conservative Party of Canada because their leader won't even get the necessary clearance to get the necessary briefing to keep Canadians safe. It's irresponsible.